Growing up, I always knew my relationship with my parents was complicated. They had high expectations, and while I tried my best to meet them, I often felt like I was falling short. My parents wanted me to pursue a practical career, something in medicine, engineering, or law. But my passion had always been in the arts, specifically graphic design. When I declared my major in college, their disappointment was palpable. "Graphic design," my dad said, his brow furrowed. "How are you going to make a living with that?" My mom chimed in, shaking her head. "We didn't work this hard for you to throw your life away on drawings." No matter how much I tried to explain the potential in my field, they wouldn't hear it. To them, anything outside of their idea of success was a failure. Despite their disapproval, I worked hard in school. I took extra shifts at my part-time job to help pay for supplies and often stayed up late finishing projects. But no matter how much effort I put in, my parents remained unimpressed. The tension came to a head during winter break of my sophomore year. I had come home for the holidays, hoping for some kind of reconciliation, but instead, the house felt colder than ever. One night, over dinner, my dad dropped a bombshell. "We've decided it's time for you to start taking more responsibility," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "You're an adult now," he said, "and since you're so determined to follow this graphic design thing, you can figure it out on your own. We need you out of the house by the end of the month." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "You're kicking me out?" I asked, disbelief and anger mixing in my voice. "It's not kicking you out," my mom said, her tone almost rehearsed. "It's giving you the push you need to stand on your own 2 feet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had always known they didn't support my choices, but I never thought they would go this far. Over the next few weeks, I scrambled to pack my things and figure out where I would go. My savings were limited, and with my part-time job barely covering the essentials, the idea of finding a place on my own felt impossible. The final straw came the day I moved out. My dad didn't even come to say goodbye, and my mom handed me a single bag of food, as if that was supposed to soften the blow. "Good luck," she said, her tone void of warmth. I walked out of that house feeling betrayed, angry, and utterly alone. Walking out of my parents' house that day felt surreal. I had a duffel bag of clothes, a few personal belongings, and no real plan. The weight of their rejection was crushing, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I needed to find somewhere to stay. Thankfully, my best friend, Eric, came through for me. When I told him what had happened, he didn't hesitate. "You can crash on my couch," he said. "It's not much, but it's yours for as long as you need." I don't know what I would have done without Eric. His apartment was small, a 1-bedroom with a cramped living room, but he made space for me without a second thought. For the next few weeks, I lived out of my duffel bag, sleeping on that worn-out couch and trying to figure out my next move. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than the alternative. I kept my part-time job at the local coffee shop, but it barely covered my share of the groceries and the little money I gave Eric for rent. The rest went toward keeping up with college expenses, textbooks, art supplies, and transportation. Balancing everything was exhausting. I'd wake up early to get to class, work long shifts in the afternoon, and then stay up late working on assignments. There were nights I fell asleep at Eric's kitchen table, my head resting on a stack of textbooks. Despite the chaos, I tried to keep a brave face. But inside, I was struggling. The humiliation of being kicked out by my own parents weighed on me, and the uncertainty of my future loomed like a dark cloud. The hardest part was knowing they didn't care. Weeks passed, and I didn't hear a single word from them. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was as if I had ceased to exist in their world. One night, as I sat on the couch staring at my bank account balance, reality hit me like a freight train. I couldn't afford to keep living like this. Between rent, groceries, and school expenses, my savings were nearly gone. I was falling behind on assignments, and the stress was starting to take a toll on my mental health. I knew something had to give. The day I decided to drop out of college felt like admitting defeat. After weeks of struggling to keep up with classes, work, and my dwindling finances, I knew I couldn't do it all anymore. Sitting on Eric's couch that night, I stared at my laptop, the withdrawal form open in front of me. My hands hovered over the keyboard, hesitation gripping me. Dropping out wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't what I wanted, but it felt like the only option left. I thought about the sacrifices I'd already made, the long hours spent working toward a degree my parents didn't even believe in, and now I was letting it go. With a deep breath, I hit submit. The next morning, I emailed my professors to let them know I wouldn't be returning. Their responses were kind, filled with well wishes and encouragement to come back when I was ready. But their words felt hollow. All I could think about was how far I'd fallen. Dropping out freed up some time, but it didn't solve my problems. I still had to make ends meet, which meant taking on more hours at the coffee shop and picking up a second job as a delivery driver. My days blurred together, early mornings making lattes, afternoons weaving through traffic to drop off packages, and evenings crashing on Eric's couch, too tired to think. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Barely. The hardest part was the isolation. Without school, I felt disconnected from the friends I used to see every day. While they talked about upcoming projects and internships, I was focused on scraping together enough money to make it through the week. I didn't hear from my parents once during this time. Not a single call or text to check on me. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of how little I seemed to matter to them. One particularly rough night, after a double shift, I broke down. Eric found me sitting on the kitchen floor, staring at my empty wallet. "I can't keep doing this," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Eric sat down beside me, his expression serious. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "This is just temporary. You're going to get through it." I wanted to believe him, but at that moment, it felt impossible. Rock bottom wasn't a single moment. It was a series of them. The nights I skipped meals to save money, the mornings I woke up sore and exhausted, the constant feeling of being stuck in a life I hadn't chosen. But even in the darkest times, there was a tiny spark of determination that refused to die. I didn't know how or when, but I promised myself one thing. I would find a way to turn things around. Rock bottom has a way of forcing you to see things differently. It strips away the noise and leaves you with one question. What now? For weeks, I lived in survival mode, just trying to make it through each day. But then, something unexpected happened. Something that changed everything. It started with a chance encounter at the coffee shop. I was working the morning shift, barely awake and going through the motions. The usual crowd was there. Regulars who ordered the same drinks every day without looking up from their phones. But then a new customer walked in. She was older, probably in her late 50s, and had an air of confidence about her. She ordered a black coffee, nothing fancy, but it was the way she spoke that caught my attention. She made eye contact, smiled, and even asked how my day was going. We started chatting, and she told me she worked in marketing and design. My ears perked up at the mention of design. "I used to study graphic design," I said, a little embarrassed to admit it. "But I had to drop out." Her brow furrowed. "Why'd you stop?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. "Life got in the way," I said finally. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That happens," she said, "but it doesn't mean you have to give up on it completely." She handed me her business card before leaving, telling me to call her if I ever wanted advice or just someone to talk to about the industry. I slipped the card into my pocket, not thinking much of it at the time. But later that night, as I sat in my tiny studio apartment, I pulled out the card and stared at it. Her name was Ellen, and she was the creative director of a design firm downtown. Something about our conversation stuck with me. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope, a reminder that maybe my dreams weren't as out of reach as they seemed. The next day, I called her. We met for coffee that weekend, and she asked me about my work, my interests, and what had drawn me to graphic design in the first place. I told her about my college projects, my love for creating, and the sacrifices I'd made to pursue it. By the end of our conversation, she offered me an internship at her firm. "It's unpaid for now," she said, "but if you're willing to put in the work, it could lead to something more." I didn't even hesitate. I accepted on the spot. Balancing the internship with my other jobs was a challenge, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was working towards something meaningful. I spent my mornings at the firm, soaking up everything I could, and my evenings making coffee and deliveries to pay the bills. The work was demanding, but it reignited a fire in me that I thought had burned out. Within a few months, Ellen started giving me more responsibilities. She saw potential in me, and her mentorship pushed me to grow in ways I hadn't expected. By the end of the internship, she offered me a full-time position as a junior designer. For the first time since being kicked out, I felt like I was truly standing on my own 2 feet. Life wasn't perfect, but it was moving in the right direction. And then, out of nowhere, life handed me an opportunity one couldn't ignore, a chance to buy my parents' house. Things had finally started to turn around for me. I was settling into my new role as a junior designer, earning a steady income, and beginning to feel like my life was back on track. Then, one day, while browsing a real estate website out of curiosity, I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. My parents' house, the house I'd grown up in, the house they'd kicked me out of, was listed for sale. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, but when I called the real estate agent, they confirmed it. My parents were selling the house. I sat there, staring at the listing, a flood of emotions washing over me. Anger, disbelief, curiosity. All of it swirled in my mind. Why were they selling? Were they in financial trouble? And why hadn't they reached out to me? The more I thought about it, the more I realized this could be an opportunity, a way to reclaim not just the house but a sense of justice. I reached out to Ellen for advice, and she connected me with a friend in real estate who helped me navigate the process. Between my savings, my steady income, and a first-time homebuyer program, I had just enough to make an offer. When my bid was accepted, I couldn't believe it. The day I signed the paperwork, I felt a mix of triumph and nerves. This was the house where I had been raised, where I had laughed, cried, and been unceremoniously kicked out. Now it was mine. The first time I walked through the front door as the owner, it felt surreal. The furniture was gone, the rooms were empty, and yet the memories were still there. But this time, I wasn't the scared, rejected kid who had walked out with a duffel bag. I was someone who had fought tooth and nail to build a life for himself. Then came the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. Telling my parents, I decided to wait until they reached out to me, which didn't take long. A week after the sale was finalized, my mom called. "Hi, sweetie," she said, her tone unusually sweet. "We're moving soon, and things have been so hectic. I just wanted to check in." "Moving?" I said, feigning surprise. "Why are you moving?" She hesitated. "Well, we're selling the house. Things have been tight lately." There it was. I took a deep breath. "You don't need to move far," I said. "In fact, you don't need to move at all." "What do you mean?" she asked, confusion evident in her voice. "I bought the house," I said, letting the words sink in. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You what?" she finally said, her voice shaking. "I bought the house," I repeated. "It's mine now. If you want to stay, you'll need to pay rent, market value rent." Her tone shifted immediately. "You can't be serious," she said. "We're your parents." "And I was your son," I replied, my voice steady. "But that didn't stop you from kicking me out when I needed you most." "I'm just returning the favor," she sputtered, trying to find the words, but I didn't give her the chance. "I'll send over the lease agreement," I said. "If you don't like the terms, you're free to find somewhere else to live." I hung up, feeling a strange combination of satisfaction and sadness. This wasn't how I wanted things to be, but it was the result of their choices. After the call with my mom, I braced myself for the fallout. I knew my decision would stir up drama, but I wasn't prepared for just how far they'd go to guilt me into changing my mind. The next day, I received a long, emotionally charged email from my mom. She wrote about how hard they'd worked to provide for me growing up, how they had sacrificed so much for my education, and how this act of vengeance was breaking her heart. I read the email carefully, noting the lack of acknowledgement for their actions, the eviction, the betrayal, the complete disregard for my well-being when I needed them most. It was all about their struggles, their feelings, their perspective. I didn't respond. Over the next week, they tried every tactic, calling repeatedly, leaving voicemails, even showing up at the house unannounced. I stood firm. When they realized I wasn't going to budge, the tone shifted. Suddenly, it wasn't about guilt. It was about anger. "You're punishing us," my dad said during one heated phone call. "Is this how you repay your family?" "This isn't about punishment," I replied calmly. "It's about respect." You didn't respect me when you kicked me out, and now I'm doing what I need to protect myself." He hung up on me, and I didn't hear from them for several days after that. Despite the tension, I felt a growing sense of closure. Owning the house wasn't just a financial victory, it was a symbolic one. It represented my journey from being cast aside to reclaiming control of my life. I rented the house to a small family, a couple with 2 young kids who were thrilled to find a place in the neighborhood. They treated the property with care, and seeing the house filled with warmth and laughter again was oddly healing. As for my parents, they found a smaller place across town. I heard through mutual acquaintances that their financial situation hadn't improved, but I didn't let it weigh on me. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. Over time, I rebuilt my life. My career in graphic design flourished, thanks to the opportunities I'd worked so hard to create. I expanded my portfolio, took on exciting projects, and even started my own small agency. I also reconnected with friends and found a deeper appreciation for the relationships that truly mattered. People like Eric, who had been there when I had nothing, reminded me of the importance of loyalty and kindness. One evening, as I sat in my own apartment, a space I had built entirely on my terms, I reflected on how far I had come. The anger and bitterness I once felt toward my parents had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of pride. I had proven to myself that I could rise above the circumstances they had thrust upon me. Looking back, I realized their actions had taught me some valuable lessons. I learned the importance of standing up for myself, the value of perseverance, and the power of reclaiming my narrative. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. If there's one thing I hope anyone reading this can take away, it's this. No matter how hard life knocks you down, you have the power to get back up. You can rebuild, you can grow, and you can thrive, even when the odds are stacked against you. Here's to moving forward, stronger and wiser than before.